Hi everybody, and welcome back to Trudge, a journey towards being recovered. My name is Dexter, and I am a recovered addict alcoholic. And I want to get right back to what we left off doing last week in the second submission of headlines and points of interest, which is, basically the early tool that we're using, based kind of the cliff notes towards deciphering and breaking down the big book for the addict or alcoholic who wants to have that spiritual experience. So last week we left off at headline number 4, which is "Can this step solve my drinking/drug problem?" And that's where we're going to pick up today. But before we get started, we had spoken a little bit last week about the third step, prayer. Although we are not anywhere near that step, that is the prayer that starts and ends, the work that we're going to do, week in and week out until we hopefully get you to the point where you're having your spiritual experience. So let's just take a second and invite our God of our own understanding in and get started with the work, shall we? This is on page 63 for those of you who have not memorized it or do not know it, and it's going to be POY pink, and it'll be in the middle of the page. God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help, of Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Thank you for those of you who joined me in doing that, and let's get to the work. So last week we ended up with headline number 4, and that's where we're going to pick up again. So we're going to start on page 13, and again, this is something that I definitely be writing down. The hopes is that you'll use this when you start taking people through the book as a trusted friend or a sponsor. And it has been very beneficial for me in working with other people's and in my own program. And again, it's not AA approved literature. This is just a collective, outline that's been put together, from, people who are, in my sponsor line, and they have passed it down to me. So let's go to page 13. So, can the steps solve my drinking/drug problem? At the bottom of the page, the very last paragraph, this is going to be POY yellow. Okay, yellow for promises. And it says, my friend promised, hopefully everybody sees that. It says, my friend promised that when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, which is just another way of saying God, or the God of your understanding, which I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. So this is POY yellow, POY written in the margin. So can the steps solve your drinking/drug problem? From what we just read there, it can solve all your problems. Not just those specific areas. It can solve the problems that you're having with relationships, with your health, with your eating habits, whatever it is. Last week I touched on my nail biting problem, which is been removed. It can help you with all your problems. So I have written at the bottom of this page that this is the most important part of Bill's story. This comes from Bill's story, the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the most important part. A man by the name of Ebby Thatcher, and this is an important somebody in the grand scheme of things, came to Bill, in Bill's New York apartment, and he spoke to Bill, when Bill had been drinking most of the day. This is near Bill's end. And he expressed to Bill what had happened to him. Ebby Thatcher was a hopeless alcoholic, and then here he comes, not having seen or spoken to Bill in months, and he's professing to Bill that he's had this change, this psychic change, and what that has entailed in helping him to stop his drinking. And this is the most important part. This is a turning point in the life of the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. So much so that if he had never had this almost kind of 12-step moment with Ebby, that this book may not have been written. I may not have been recovered. I wouldn't be here, teaching this work to you. So this is very, very, very important. And I have the word all in all my problems circled, because that's important to know. I wanted to just not drink and drug, and I got so much more. All my problems have been solved as long as I stick to the simple, method of thinking that my God is everything, for sure. All right. So, can the steps solve my drug/drug problem? Absolutely. Let's move on. Page 42. So at the bottom of page 42, this is also going to be POY. It is also going to be yellow. Yellow is for promises. This is what's going to be promised to you that you will have happen to you as a result of doing this work. And it says, quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. POY yellow, again, the word all is circled in all my problems. Again, it's not staying specific to a drink or a drug, but as the result of having a spiritual awakening at the hands of doing these steps, you'll find that practicing these spiritual principles that are embodied in our steps will solve whatever problem you have. Okay? POY yellow, bottom of page 42. So my friends, the next headline number 5, we're starting to move through, is why should I take the steps? You know, why should anyone take the steps? You have somebody who's new, they're wet behind the ears, they come in and they hear you in a meeting and you're talking about the steps as being the solution. They want to know, well, why? You know, we want this explained to us. The points of interest are going to start with page XXI, and it's going to say forward to the second edition. So at the bottom, it's going to be 5 lines up from the very last page of XXI forward to the second edition. It says, upon therapy for the alcoholic himself. You guys see this? This is going to be POY orange. Okay. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly. So it's telling you that this is not the only way some people, you know, stop drinking. You know, I've known people that have gone to church and they've never had another lick of alcohol again in their lives. I know of people who have prayed in sweat lodges naked and they've never drank or drugged ever again. So it's telling you that we have no monopoly. Yet, it is our great hope that all who have not yet found no answer, me, when I started doing this work, you possibly watching as the viewer, may begin to find one on the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom. So I have the word new freedom. The words new freedom are going to be underlined. And so why should you take this step? Because it's a different kind of freedom than you've ever experienced before. See, I went to tons of meetings, but I was still a slave. I was like bound to still doing a lot of things. Although they weren't drinking and using drugs, you know, I was still, you know, unfaithful in relationships. I embezzled money. You know, I didn't really understand freedom in all my affairs. I still struggled with certain foods, you know what I mean? I still tried to put things in to make me feel better. You know, there were a lot of things that I felt like I absolutely had to do on a daily basis just to live. That had nothing to do with drugs and alcohol. The new freedom that we're talking about that you'll have as the result of doing this work, it will be freedom from the bondage of self that we speak about in that third step prayer that I started with. You won't have to do those things anymore. We are building an arch through which you, the viewer, can walk through, man or woman or child, and be free. You'll live free. You'll feel free. You will not have to do those things. And that's a new freedom that I didn't know about. I thought that if I didn't just drink or drug, that everything was going to be fine. And it was for a time. But the truth of the matter was I was just a slave in other areas. So why should you take the steps? Because you want real freedom in all your affairs and all your activities. Especially from the bondage of self, which is one of the biggest prisons that many of us live in day to day. So why should I take the steps? Page XVIII, this is a tricky one, and I believe it is in the chapter entitled The Doctor's Opinion, and this is going to be the second paragraph from the top on page XVIII, entitled The Doctor's Opinion, and it's going to be POY orange. This is going to be highlighted orange, and it says, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. So, you know, that's like some of that big book jargon that nobody can ever make sense of. You know, I mean, this is written in like the late 1930s, 1939. I mean, if you have like a 1939 dictionary, it would be really applicable to this book. They're very expensive, but if you ever get your hands on one, it could really help you. The way that was explained to me was, you know, the look good seldom suffices. You know, the swag, it seldom suffices. You know, there's no substance, you know, behind the program that I had. You know, but I could talk a good game. I could talk a good recovery game. I articulate, well spoken. But like when it came down to it, there was really nothing inside. I had nothing to give, you know, and that's what that means, you know, that frothy emotional appeal, that look of it. That's not going to be enough. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people or these addicted people must, and the word must is circled, have depth and weight. It's got to have those two things. Okay, depth and weight are both underlined, and that's just another way of saying, guys, experience and solution. So if you come to me looking for help, I have to have those two things. I have to have experience that you can relate to. I have to have done that. I have to have lived through that and then had the solution to how I got through that in order to hold your attention. I can't help you if I don't have those two things. On page 164 is like it says in this book that you can't transmit something that you haven't got. Understand? If I don't know how to ride a bike, I can't teach you how to ride a bike. If I haven't had the experience of falling off that bike and getting back up and getting better at it, I can't teach you how to ride that bike. Same thing with this work. In nearly all cases, and I have the word all circled, their ideals must, and the word must is always circled anytime we see it in this book, continuing IPOY Orange, must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. And so, you know, there I was in meetings 10, 11 years, you know, and I really didn't have that relationship with a power greater than myself. You know, I had plenty of meeting attendance, drank plenty of coffee, watched plenty of coffee cups, talked to a lot of different addicts and alcoholics, but I didn't have God all the time. It was only when I wanted God, and so I half measured the program, and what I got in return was, you know, a program that had some holes in it, you know, and this is telling you that in order to recreate your life and have that new freedom that we just spoke about, it has to be grounded in a power greater than yourself. You know, it has to be the gas that goes into the car. It just has to be. The nucleus of the program starts and ends with having a power greater than yourself. We talked about this in POY VIP, you know, finding a power greater than yourself that will help you with your problem. It has to have that. Okay? So, why should you take the steps? Because you want to recreate your life. You know, the life you're living is probably a good one if you're not drinking and drugging or whatever it is, but it can be better. You know, it can go to a different level where you're free and have that peace in all your affairs. So, why should I take the steps? Page 44. And this is in the chapter We Agnostics. This is for those, you know, people who are without spiritual knowledge or don't believe that a higher power, you know, is something that they can ever believe in. And so for the point of interest is going to be highlighted orange, and it's going to start with the very first paragraph. The whole thing is going to be highlighted orange. It says, in the preceding chapters you have learned something of alcoholism. We Agnostics follows a chapter called More About Alcoholism, chapter 3. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic, which is what we want you to do. Because if you're not an alcoholic, you don't need the solution. If when you honestly want to, and the word honestly is circled, you know, there's that buzzword, you know, honesty, open-mindedness, willingness. These are things that you're going to have to attain this spiritual awakening. You find you cannot quit entirely, or if when you are drinking you have little control, there's that word again, control. This is about control and choice. We're going to circle the word control. Over the amount you take, then you are probably alcoholic. Same thing can be with a drug. Same thing can be with a donut, whatever it is. Same thing can be with gambling, stealing, whatever, okay? This is the very important part which answers why I should take the steps. Highlighted orange still. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness, and we like to think it an illness. Okay, we're going to go ahead and circle that word illness, which only, the word only is circled, only, which only a spiritual experience will conquer. So why should you take the steps? Because you want this conquered, you know, you want this to go away. Why should you take the steps? Because you don't want to have to live with this affliction. You know, people who have cancer, they don't want cancer, they want it gone, they want it taken away. They want it in remission. They want it to stay away. So what do? Many of these people, they do chemotherapy, and it works for a lot of these people. This is no different. You want this to be gone. You know, this illness to be removed, and it can be, and it will be, if you, the viewer, did what I did and were willing to go to any length to take certain steps. So, only. The word only is very important there. If you are placed in that spot beyond human aid, more than likely, there's only one thing that's going to work for you, and that's having a spiritual experience, okay? POY orange, why should I take the steps? So moving through, the next headline. We've been talking about this spiritual experience. We've been kind of sprinkling it in, through the first 5 headlines of, the points of interest as well. Now the next one is, what is a spiritual experience? We're talking about this as if it's the solution. Well, what is that? Okay, you have a new sponsor. He wants to know, well, what is that? Well, let's find out. Page 27 is going to be the point of interest. And it starts in the middle of the page, second paragraph. And this is, I believe, still the story of Roland Hazard. I think we may have touched on this earlier in our points of interest. And it says, yes, replied the doctor, there is. In reference to, are there no exceptions to people getting well of the hopeless alcoholics getting well? Is there no, because this Roland Hazard, the wealthy Rhode Island businessman, spent a lot of time with Dr. Carl Jung, came back to America from being in Europe with this man for close to a year, spent thousands of dollars, and convicted he would never drink again. And shortly thereafter, a few weeks later, he was drunk and couldn't understand why. Calls up the doctor and, what's going on, Like, is there no hope for people like me? And the doctor says, yes, there is hope for you. POY orange. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. The word vital is circled, that buzzword, like it's absolutely of paramount importance to have this. Okay? This happened long before Bill W. even ever got this message, guys. A lot of people think that AA started with Bill. This started long before Bill. It's telling you that this has been going on, these occurrences, since early times, even earlier than the early 1930s, when we started to hear about it and see it documented. To me, this is Dr. Jung speaking to Roland Hazard, to me these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Okay, continuing on, POY orange. This is the real crux of the answer, though, what the spiritual experience is. I have stars around the rest of this. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces in the lives of these men and women, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. I have the word dominate circled. Okay, and this is usually what the spiritual experience entails. This is what happened to me. I had a way of living that I thought I just had it. Okay, I'm clean, I'm sober, I'm not drinking, I'm not drugging, but my manner of living was keeping me really, really sick. Thinking that I could run the show, thinking that I had the power to, change things. I was all wrong about that. Thinking that left to my own devices, I would never pick up a drink or a drug, thinking that my life was whole. Meanwhile, I was doing a lot of dirty things when no one was looking. And the truth of the matter is, the way it was explained to me is that I had to put all that thinking, all that sickness that I had in here, I had to get it out. I had to be willing to get rid of it, put it on the shelf, and I'd start fresh. They say you can't graft a new idea on a closed mind. My mind was closed by the time my sponsor got to me. And she said, you got to take all that stuff out. We're getting a plunger, and we're plunging all that nonsense out. And we are going to start filling it with the real solution, the original 12 steps in its entirety. And we're going to start to put that in here. We're like reprogramming you, Dexter, to live according to the will of the God of your understanding when you come to that that place where you have that relationship. And what started happening for me is I just started to feel different as all this nonsense seeped out of here. All this ego, all this self-centeredness and selfishness started to seep out, and this new work started to come in. It began to dominate the man that I was, and I began to change. That is how you can best explain a spiritual experience. It's like rearranging the furniture up here. It's like reprogramming a computer. You get to recreate your life as the result of doing some very simple things through these steps. Okay? I'm hoping that this is making sense to you. There's a lot of different synonyms that you can use for the spiritual experience. Spiritual awakening, psychic change, personality change. They all mean the same thing. The goal is always the same. To have all this hardwire up here rewired. You know, and as the result of having a relationship with a power greater than yourself, which you have through doing this work, you're almost reborn. It's almost like you get to step out of the shell of the person that you once were and be the person that God of your understanding wants you to be. And by having that, your problems will be solved. Absolutely. There's no question about it. This has been my experience and the experience of thousands of recovered addicts and alcoholics through the history since the inception of this periodical, this basic text, which is a basic text. Call it basic text because it's meant to be studied. It's meant to be gone through and studied. It's not like a Harlequin romance or 50 Shades of Recovery where you look at it and think it's, oh, that was a really good book. We stay in the book. Okay, we stay in the book. If it's not for us, we're teaching it to someone else. Hopefully this is making sense to you all. What is a spiritual experience? Page 567. This is going to be the point of interest. This is all the way in the back of the book. And I strongly suggest, you know, between now and the next submission of Trudge that if you've never read this, to read this. You know, this is really, really important. This explains in great detail more about what a spiritual experience is. The point of interest is going to be at the very beginning of the chapter on top of page 567, POY orange, and it says, the terms spiritual experience and spiritual awakening are used many times in this book. Upon careful reading, shows that the personality change, you know, that way of thinking, sufficient to bring around recovery from alcoholism or drug addiction or whatever, okay, has manifested itself among us in different forms. And so that's saying that, you know, everyone's spiritual awakening is going to be different. You know, mine was just a garden variety spiritual awakening. I started to shut up. I started to listen. I started to read this book, practice what I learned from this book and my sponsor in my life. I had a relationship. I came to an understanding of a power greater than myself and began to have a relationship with that power, and I changed. It may be different for you. There may be a burning bush in your story. You know, there may be the godly moment in your story. Everyone's is different. You know, but this 2 pages is absolutely worth reading. Absolutely. There's no question about it. I would take the time and go through that and get a better understanding of what that means for you. So, we're now throwing out the spiritual experience, what that is, as being the solution. Headline number 7. How do I have a spiritual experience? Okay? There is only one point of interest for this, and it's going to be on page 60. And if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict of the hopeless variety like I was, and you've placed yourself beyond human aid, there's basically one solution. And for this headline, there's only one point of interest. Okay? The top of page 60, POY orange. How do I have a spiritual experience? It says, having had a spiritual awakening or personality change, psychic change, spiritual awakening, you all mean the same thing, as the result of these steps. That's highlighted orange. That's how you have a spiritual awakening. You have one as the result of working the 12 steps in their entirety. And if you're anything like me and some of the people that I've worked with, there's a good chance that'll start happening long before you start working 12 steps. You know, as soon as I started really putting aside all the stuff that I think I knew about everything, I started to change. It was well before I had gotten to step 12 or gotten through all 12 steps, okay? This is our message. Nowadays, if you ask 50 addicts or 50 alcoholics what our message is, you're going to hear 50 different things. According to the literature that's been written before us and been put out there for us to follow, there's one message. You have a spiritual awakening from working these steps, and your life gets better. Your drinking goes away. The problem gets to be removed. This is our message. It is very, very clear. And this comes from step 12 in how it works, the chapter 5 and how it works. So, headline number 8. Okay? You hear about the spiritual experience. How do you get to the spiritual experience? You hear about taking the steps. Headline number 8 is, when do I take the steps? When? let's turn to page 58, 2 pages to the right. This is going to be a long point of interest. It is from chapter 5, how it works. The whole thing is going to be highlighted orange, POI in the margin, okay? This is read at most Alcoholics Anonymous meetings before the meeting. I think a lot of times it gets just read and we kind of go with it. But it is very, very clear, okay, in reference to when do I take the steps. It says, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. The word thoroughly is circled. That's one of those buzzwords. We don't half-ass this path. And the path is going to be the steps. Anytime the book talks about the path is going to be the steps. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. The word completely is circled. You're all in or you're all out. You can be 99% in, and that 1% can take you out. You have to completely give yourself to this simple program, and it is simple. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. And there's that word honest again. Honesty, honest, it keeps popping up. It just keeps popping up in the book, okay? Anytime we see that word, we're going to circle it. So I circle the word honest. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Okay, buzzwords, we circle them both rigorously. We do it very, very, very thoroughly, okay? The chances are less than average. Just telling you that if you're not all in, if you're not really working this to the best of your ability, like, you know, I'd even say like half the way we try to attain our substances, you know, or a third of the effort that we put into that, you know, you're going to get something out of this, you know. Give it that same effort, it is, you cannot fail, all right? The chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders. But many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. That word honest again. So we've seen the word honest come up 3 times in just one paragraph. You think that they're trying to tell us something. You know, these are the things we need to pay attention. Rigorous honesty, being thorough, taking this to the max, doing it like, you know, to the best of your ability. You know, before doing this work to the best of my ability, the only thing I had ever done to the best of my ability in my entire life was get loaded. That's it. You know, really giving it that good effort. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. Continuing on, POI orange. This is all still one POI. This is the crux of the answer, though, for when do I take the steps. It says, if you, and I have you circled, you out there listening, you know, this is about you right now. If you have decided you want what we have, and are willing to go to any length to get it. The word willing is circled. You have to be willing to do the work. You know, if I want a law degree, I have to be willing to go to law school. You know, if I want the 6-pack abs that I see the guy at the gym have, I got to be willing to do what he did. Willing to go to any length to get it. Then you are ready to take certain steps. So, when do you take the steps? Dude, you take the steps when you're willing to go to any length. When you're ready to take the steps is when you take the steps. And you're not going to take them before that and get that result until you're willing to go to any length. You know, I spent 11 years in the 12-step rooms, and I really wasn't willing to go to any length. I picked and chose the parts of the program that I wanted to work, and it didn't work because I wasn't willing to follow the directions, man. You know, it was just that simple. You know, it's like you go to you know, Kmart or Bimart or whatever store you have wherever you're at, Walmart, and you know, the furniture, you know, you buy these little shelves, you know, and this is one that I've always struggled with, and they come in these directions that are just like impossible to read, and I'm not willing to go to any lengths to follow those directions, and then all of a sudden when I'm done building it, it's a shell of what it should be, and I have all this leftover pieces. I know this has happened to everyone I know. You know, until I'm willing to take the time and follow the directions to putting that together properly, it's not going to look like it does in the picture. Same thing with this work. You want what's happened to our forefathers to happen to you. What happened to my sponsor to happen to me. I had to be willing to go to any lengths. And I think we do other people a disservice by telling them, right, that, oh, you're not ready to take the steps yet. Or you're too young. This is one I've heard. You're too young to take the steps yet. Dude, God tells you when to take the steps. Okay? And you're not going to do the work a minute before. That's been my experience. Hopefully You don't have to do what I did and suffer for as long as I did. You can just decide to take the steps now and have a spiritual experience. Come in right in the doors of the 12-step rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. You can get it right away. You don't have to wait. So that is going to be, that's the answer to that point of interest. That headline, when do you take the steps? You take the steps when you're willing to go to any length. And if at any time during this work, you're not willing to go to any length, you get to step 6 and you decide you're not willing to do that, or you get to steps 8, 9, and you're like, you know what, I'm not making that amends to that person. I'm sorry. Dude, you cannot cry and complain when that spiritual experience doesn't take hold of you the way it should, because you have chosen to pick and choose the parts of your program that you want to work, and that's what I did. Hopefully that's making sense to everyone. Let's do a little bit more. I'm feeling pretty good. So, we're talking about the spiritual experience, we're talking about the steps, we're talking about this is the solution, okay? Headline number 9. How do I take the steps? How? You're on fire for this thing, but you want to know how to do this, okay? Let's go to page 29. First paragraph at the top of page 29, this is going to be POY, it is going to be orange, and it says, further on, clear-cut directions. Those 2 words are circled, okay? And the directions, they're just the steps. They're just the steps, you know. They have ceased being suggestions when you're willing to go to any length. They become instructions or directions to making that soup that I talked about in my last submission, or to putting together, you know, that cabinet that you've just bought. They're directions, okay? Further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered. There's that word again. Doesn't say recovering, it says how we recovered. How the obsession to do that has been removed. The word recovered is circled, clear-cut circled, directions are circled. Clear-cut, buzzword, meticulously put in. Clear-cut, it's simple. You follow the instructions and you get the result. These are followed by 42 personal experiences, which are some of the readings in the back of the book that people speak to about how that's happened for them, how they're bearing witness through the book, through the literature, how I bared witness in my introduction to you, the viewer, of how I became recovered. That's how do you take the steps? You follow the directions. You follow the directions. More times than not, it makes perfect sense to have somebody sponsor you through, or a trusted friend take you through the book, who has worked all 12 steps in their entirety and has had a spiritual experience. You know, like we just talked about, from the point of interest in the doctor's opinion, that person should have 2 things: experience and solution, depth and weight. These are the things that you're going to need in order to get to this spiritual experience. My experience was I couldn't just read the book. I had to be taught the book. I had to study the book. I had to apply the spiritual principles that I learned from the book in my life. That's how you do it. Let's do one more, and then we'll save the rest for headlines and points of interest part 3. How do I take the steps? Let's go to page XVII, and this is going to be forward to the 2nd edition. Really not a fan of the Roman numerals. Okay, so forward to the 2nd edition, page XVII. It is the top of the page, POY orange, and it says, it is indicated that strenuous work, what is that word again? Strenuous, rigorous, thoroughly. These buzzwords, they're not there by accident. When you think of strenuous, I think of heavy lifting, really getting into, doing the work, stirring the pot, laying the concrete, hammering the nail. We're doing work here, okay? Strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, you know, and I suggest that other be that person, that sponsor, that person that's come before you, that person that can, you know, has done that work, who can teach it to you and show it to you, was vital. There's that word again, vital, lifeline. It's the lifeline to permanent recovery. I have permanent recovery underlined. Okay? You can be recovering all you want. You know, I used to do that every day, waking up, making sure I slay the dragon again today so I can get another day, not knowing that the problem can be removed. It can absolutely be taken away, Okay? It gets to go away as the result of working the steps. So, how do you work the steps? You work them strenuously. You work them with another addict or an alcoholic who's come before you, who can teach you. It tells you that it's vital. It is absolutely the life and blood of the program to being recovered. That's how it's done, okay? So, that's all for this submission of Trudge. I would definitely like to express to you guys that I always do to the people that, like I always do with the people I work with, that it's not just about what you do when you're watching me and going in, highlighting POI headlines, and I'm spitting out all this information and you're just jotting it all down and getting it down. It's not just about what you do when we're doing the submission. It's about what you do when you're not doing the submission. Are you going back and are you rereading the work? Is it making sense to you? Are you understanding it? Are you, if you don't have a sponsor, are you seeking out a sponsor who has done this, who is in the book this way, who can continue to support you and help you get to your spiritual experience? It's very important. Again, if you don't practice something, you're never going to get good. I took piano lessons for a lot of years. I never got any better and never really took that to the next level because I wasn't willing to practice between sessions, and I eventually gave up on it, and I think I could have been good. Or practicing riding a bike, or practicing drumming, anything that amounts to anything in this world, it requires work and effort. And that's the type of thing that it's suggested to all of you out there, the viewers who are listening to me and trying to understand and get these new concepts to do. Go back and go over the work. It makes perfect sense. So that's it for this submission of Trudge this week, headlines, points of interest. Next week, on Monday, I will drop the third installment of Headlines and Points of Interest, and we will finish this quote-unquote Cliff Notes, this tool, and then we will start going through the book in its entirety, the whole first 164 pages. There are a lot of different things that you can do to also support the work that we're doing here. One of the things that I did is I listened to recovery speakers. I listen to a lot of AA recovery speakers who speak about being recovered in the spiritual experience. Not all of them do that. Those are the ones that I spoke, that I'm speaking about, that some of them are highlighted on my page for those of you who are subscribed. I also watched the Bill W. movie, learning as much about the history of this program as I could really, really helped me. I don't believe that you can know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. And so I did a lot of things like that. I will continue to post things like that on my page for those of you that may be interested. And that's all for this week. So until next week, everyone be well. Please remember to pay attention, pay it forward when you can, and absolutely rely on God and not on others. That has been the formula that has worked for me and has yet to fail me. Until next week, everyone, namaste.